I remember the exact moment when I realized that rest wasn't healing me the way I thought it should. I had spent the whole day trying to slow down, putting away my phone, dimming the lights, even lying still with eyes closed. But inside, my mind refused to follow. It buzzed relentlessly, like a radio stuck on the same static station, regardless of how deep I tried to sink into calm. That quiet evening, instead of feeling restored, I felt more exhausted than before, caught in this invisible storm that no peaceful setting could calm. It was as if a hidden alarm inside me wouldn't stop ringing, and no matter how much I wished it would, the noise just kept gnawing at the edges of my rest. For a long time, I blamed myself for this failure. Why can't I just relax? I would think, feeling both frustrated and ashamed. The rest of the world seemed to drift effortlessly into moments of peace, while I was locked inside this cycle of tension that wouldn't let up. Even when my body became heavy and weary, my mind stayed awake, restless, jittery. It wasn't just about feeling anxious. For me, it was this deeper frustration of trying so hard to be still and finding that stillness always slipped through my fingers. It made me wonder, what if the problem wasn't about trying more or harder, but something else altogether, something I hadn't yet understood about how my body and brain were wired? I started noticing the details I'd never paid attention to before. The way my body would tense up just as soon as I started to relax, like a reflex I couldn't control. Or how my thoughts seemed to orbit the same worries no matter how many times I told myself to let them go. Sometimes, even when I felt physically safe, my brain reacted as if I were still in danger, like an internal system stuck in high alert. That alarm never fully shut down, and it wore me thin. At first, I thought the answer must be in finding the right distraction or a new relaxation practice, any quick fix to press pause on this turmoil. But those approaches barely scratched the surface. My experience was proving to me that anxiety wasn't just a mental hiccup waiting for sheer willpower to dissolve. It felt more like a complex dance between mind and body, an ongoing conversation I didn't yet have the key to understand. I want you to know, if you're reading this and feeling the same way, that you're not alone in this exhausting battle. I've been where you are, feeling like the harder I tried to rest, the louder the noise inside would grow, wondering why my mind couldn't match the calm I craved in my body. It's a confusing, lonely place to be because it looks like rest should help, but somehow, it just doesn't. And that trap of trying over and over again, yet feeling like nothing changes, can eat away at your hope. But there's also something deeply human about this experience, as if it's inviting us to wake up to the way our nervous system and our fears intertwine. It's a subtle message that the usual tools, just stopping, slowing down, or pushing through, aren't enough on their own. Something beneath our surface needs to be looked at with fresh eyes and a different kind of care. This isn't about weakness or lack of effort. It's about understanding the hidden currents beneath our struggle. I invite you to walk with me through this story, not just the story of anxiety that refuses to switch off, but the story of how that internal alarm came to be, why it stays on, and what it's really trying to tell us. I'm going to share with you the deeper reasons that keep this cycle turning, pointing us toward a path where we stop fighting our own minds and start learning to work alongside them. When we do that, we can begin to unlock a more profound kind of rest, a rest that isn't just the absence of movement, but the presence of safety and ease within. So before we rush into solutions or quick fixes, I want us to pause here in this shared space of understanding. Let's acknowledge the exhaustion, the confusion, and the frustration without trying to push them away. Because these feelings have a language all their own, and hearing them is often the first gentle step toward a quieter mind. If your anxiety has ever felt like an endless alarm, this is your invitation to start listening deeply to the signals, the sensations, and the stories beneath the surface. And as you read on, maybe you'll begin to see that this doesn't have to be a story of relentless battle anymore. It can become a story of discovery and healing, a story where your strength is found not in fighting harder, but in learning how to find peace even when your mind seems to resist. We're in this together, exploring a path that isn't easy, but one that holds the promise of learning to truly rest, not just in body but in heart and mind. I wonder, right now, in this moment, where does your anxiety insist on staying awake when you wish it would quiet down? When does that internal alarm feel the loudest? And what do you feel it's trying to tell you? The answers lie ahead, not in resistance, but in gentle awareness and new understanding. Let's begin this journey together. There was a night I couldn't forget, a night when silence should have wrapped around me like a soft blanket, but instead, it felt more like a cage tightening with every breath. I lay in bed, willing my body to relax, trying to coax my thoughts into stillness. Yet, beneath all the effort, a fierce storm brewed inside. It wasn't just mental restlessness. My body betrayed me. My chest tightened, as if something unseen pressed against it. My breath shortened without warning, and an overwhelming surge of tension gripped my shoulders. It was as though I had an internal conductor feverishly orchestrating a symphony of unease, unyielding to any attempt at calm. What I had failed to grasp for a long time was how deeply intertwined my nervous system was in this relentless state. Our bodies hold stories written in our nerves, and sometimes those stories are haunted by echoes from the past without our conscious awareness. In my case, bits of unresolved unease had lodged themselves in my physiology, like stubborn debris refusing to wash away with rest. It's not only about calming the mind. It's about the body's embedded memory of threat, looping endlessly through spinal cords and neural circuits. Recognizing this shifted my perspective. I was dealing with a biological system locked in vigilance, programmed to expect danger even when none was present. One evening, I traced the thread of this tension back to an ingrained survival mechanism that had hijacked my sense of safety. It dawned on me that my nervous system was essentially stuck in a mode of hyperalertness, flooded by stress hormones that refused to ebb. This wasn't a failure of willpower or lack of intention to unwind. It was a deeply wired response designed to keep me alive in situations where threat existed, but now misfiring in times of peace. As absurd as it felt, my body was acting as if the shadows of past challenges were still lurking just out of sight, ready to pounce at any sign of vulnerability. Curiously, the origins of this overactive mode often trace back to moments that barely registered in the conscious mind. Microtraumas, emotional neglect, or subtle stresses that accumulate unnoticed. I remember discovering how my brain had developed associations between safety and unease, almost as if calm was equated with danger. This revelation was unsettling but liberating in its clarity. Instead of battling my own physiology, I began to appreciate that what I named restlessness was actually my nervous system's skewed interpretation of out-of-date signals. My body didn't know how to recalibrate itself on its own, especially when left to rest in traditional ways. There was also a layer of relentless self-monitoring that kept me trapped. My mind acted like an ever-watchful sentinel, scanning every sensation, every heartbeat, searching for threats or signs of loss of control. This relentless internal feedback loop created a paradoxical trap. The more closely I examined my experience searching for calm, the more elusive it became. It was like trying to catch smoke with bare hands. The harder I focused on stillness, the further it drifted away. This constant vigilance stemmed from a fear hidden beneath conscious awareness, the dread of surrendering control to an unpredictable mind or body. At one point, I verbalized my frustration to a close friend. I'm so tired of trying to silence what feels like a spinning drum inside me that won't stop. Their response surprised me. They said, "Maybe your drum isn't trying to keep you awake. It might be trying to tell you something important, but you haven't learned its language yet." That moment sparked something essential. Instead of suppressing or ignoring the insistent tension, I had to get curious about it, like a detective uncovering clues rather than an enemy to fight. This meant shifting my attitude from resistance to partnership, welcoming the signals rather than fearing them. Tracing these layers further, I realized that the nervous system's volume knob had to be gently adjusted, not slammed off or forced into silence. True regulation requires subtlety, patience, and attuned awareness. It's like tuning an instrument that's been out of harmony for years. Sudden tension breaks will only damage the strings further. Instead, the approach had to involve gradually teaching my body what safety might feel like once more, practices to restore balance rather than push against discomfort. I began to experiment with small rituals, gentle breathing exercises that didn't demand perfection, slow movement that invited presence rather than performance, and moments of mindful observation that allowed tension to ebb naturally. Later, I found myself intrigued by the connection between certain thought patterns and nervous system activation. For instance, subconscious, if thin, fears created an invisible web that kept me constantly alert. If I'm still, then danger approaches. If I let go, then chaos ensues. These cognitive traps fed the physiological tension, producing a feedback cycle almost impossible to break without addressing both mind and body in tandem. This realization urged me to approach anxiety not only as a psychological phenomenon, but also as a neurobiological condition needing comprehensive attention. Now, consider how this applies when you face moments of forced stillness, whether lying down after a busy day or sitting quietly before sleep. The discomfort you experience may stem from much more than surface worries. It is the legacy of nervous system patterns that have become stubborn, entrenched habits of guarding rather than relaxing. Yet, these patterns are malleable. They respond to gentle, consistent care and intentional reprogramming. When you start listening to what your body's tension is really signaling and shift from scrutiny toward curiosity and compassion, you begin to rewrite those ancient codes. In these new interactions with my own experience, rest became less an arbitrary halt and more a practice of building trust with my body's deepest systems. Instead of forcing calm, I learned to invite it, offering reassurance and presence to the restless parts rather than demanding compliance. This subtle but profound shift allowed spaces of genuine ease to emerge where before there had been only noise. Your journey might look different, but the essence is the same. The path forward isn't about battling or silencing the buzzing energy within. It's about engaging with it as a complex messenger, recognizing the biological rhythms beneath anxious feelings, and nurturing a relationship that can heal through small acts of gentle regulation. This is where true calm can begin to unfold, layer by layer, step by deliberate step. It was late one evening, and exhaustion had wrapped around me like a thick, damp blanket, heavy and suffocating. I had prepared myself to finally surrender to rest, imagining that sleep was just within reach. Yet, as soon as I closed my eyes, a strange sensation began, a subtle, almost imperceptible tightening beneath my ribs, as if my body was clutching something hidden and refused to release it. The quiet room suddenly seemed charged with an unseen electricity, jolting me awake with a pulse that echoed inside my chest. I could almost hear a whispered warning humming beneath my breath, a caution no amount of fatigue dared override. In that moment, I recognized an invisible weight I hadn't fully confronted before. This relentless internal friction wasn't merely about mental tension or fleeting worries. It was something ingrained in the very patterns of my biology, a wiring that had adapted long ago to meet challenges, but now operated out of sync with my daily reality. It was as if an old, unrecognized trauma had cast a long shadow inside me, nudging my body into preemptive battle mode without conscious consent. I recalled a therapist explaining how prolonged exposure to stress builds not just memories in the brain, but physical imprints throughout the body's framework. She described it as physiological scripting, where muscles, tissues, and organs begin holding onto emotional residues in tangible ways. I could see this in flashes of insight, my shoulders chronically raised, jaw clenched, and a restless tension nesting in my diaphragm. Literally, parts of me were encoding anxious signals, rehearsing survival strategies no longer needed but stubbornly repeated. Suddenly, rest wasn't merely a practice of quieting the mind. It demanded coaxing features of my body to rewrite an outdated narrative etched deep into muscle and bone. A realization unfolded that my body's alarm was less about immediate danger and more a habit forged through historical patterns of stress and response. I found myself wondering, had these embedded reactions evolved to protect me during past upheavals, yet now stood in opposition to peace? This internal tug-of-war played out silently, where each breath struggled to find fullness amid subtle contractions, as if the anatomy of ease had been forgotten. I remember one night lying still, paying close attention to how my ribs expanded and collapsed. A slight catch in the breath would ripple through me unnoticed unless witnessed with acute focus. At times, I sensed my heartbeat galloping against my chest wall, hastening without external cause. In that fragile space, I began sensing that beneath my attempts to relax existed a body holding both tension and distrust, anticipating threats that had long passed, but whose traces lingered like ghosts. My breakthrough happened gradually as I explored ways to engage with these sensations without pushing them away. I experimented with positioning myself in moments of vulnerability, like rocking gently or placing my hands softly over my abdomen, to create a tender dialogue with my own flesh. Sometimes, repeating a slow sigh or embracing a moment of paleness in the face was a kind of surrender, coaxing my body to reconsider old responses as negotiable rather than immutable. These small acts became profound signposts on a more intimate path toward healing. During this time, I also noticed something curious about how external environments triggered these latent bodily alarms. For example, certain noises, lighting, or social contexts seem to unknowingly stir a cascade of internal cues. A cafe's clamor or a crowded aisle at the store might generate an unrecognized tension that scaled into sharp discomfort. This sensitivity revealed a layered interaction with the outside world, where my body's internal landscape was intricately linked to everyday input, sometimes reacting before conscious awareness kicked in. The complexity of this interplay amazed me, emphasizing the multidimensionality of the challenge. I was also introduced to the concept of neuroplasticity of the body, the idea that our physical structure and its patterns are constantly reshaped by experience, not only the mind. This opened a new frontier of hope. If my system had adapted to protect me before, perhaps it could learn to reinstate calm, to embrace new, safer patterns through consistent, compassionate intervention. It was like planting seeds in fallow soil, trusting that although the surface seemed barren, life was quietly waiting to emerge. One evening, feeling particularly vulnerable, I confided in a close friend. It feels like my body is holding meetings without telling me what's on the agenda. I'm exhausted trying to negotiate peace. They smiled softly and replied, maybe it's not about control, but about listening to what your body has kept safe all this time. There's wisdom in those waiting rooms of tension. This conversation shifted how I related to my own sensations, transforming invisible barricades into opportunities for dialogue instead of confrontation. Now, reflecting on how this applies to your quiet moments of attempted rest, consider the idea that your body harbors stories that surface in subtle yet profound ways. These are not signs of personal failure, but reflections of deeply rooted adaptations guarding a fragile trust. Inviting curiosity into these experiences, examining how and where tension gathers, can open a doorway to healing that transcends surface calm. Sometimes, the most transformative rest comes when we lovingly engage the physical language of our being, translating years of silent messages into a symphony of restored peace. There was a time when I found myself trapped in a peculiar loop. Efforts to quiet my restless thoughts seemed to trigger an unexpected surge of unease instead. I recall sitting in my living room late at night, a candle flickering softly beside me, the silence inviting what I hoped would be a soothing reprieve. Instead, my mind darted from one shadowy corner of worry to another, and bizarrely, my chest tightened, as though a constricting band wrapped around it more firmly with each passing moment. It felt as if my body was waging a secret war against the tranquility I craved, refusing to yield to the gentleness of stillness. Curious and frustrated, I began observing how my physical state was intertwined with subtle emotional currents I hadn't noticed before. An insight struck me. Tension was often less about recent events and more about unspoken fears embedded deep within my being. Fears lodged beneath layers of habit and history. I started to see that certain thoughts, although not obviously alarming, functioned like triggers that sparked cascades of physiological responses. For instance, anticipating a future scenario, no matter how remote, would amplify my restlessness, as if my body rehearsed a battle it was certain was coming. One evening, while journaling by the faint glow of my desk lamp, I traced the origin of those subtle fears to moments characterized by unpredictability or helplessness in my past, times when control slipped from my grip and uncertainty engulfed me. These unprocessed emotions had built an invisible architecture, shaping my reactions long after those moments had passed. The more I tried to unplug from anxiety with superficial calm, the more entrenched these old blueprints seemed to become. It dawned on me that relaxation wasn't just about pausing movement. It required remodeling the emotional imprints that dictated how my body prepared for threat. A defining turning point arose when I explored how my attentiveness to internal cues contributed to this endless march of alertness. I noticed that an almost obsessive watchfulness over physical sensations created a feedback loop that intensified discomfort. For example, a slight flutter in my stomach, previously insignificant, would morph into a burgeoning crescendo of alarm the more I focused on it. It was as if my curiosity was a magnifying glass, amplifying tiny sparks into roaring flames. Paradoxically, attempting to observe neutrally without judgment became another layer of complexity, a balancing act between awareness and overanalysis that was exhausting in itself. One day, through the patient guidance of a mentor, I experimented with deliberately shifting this dynamic. Instead of locking attention onto sensations, I practiced allowing them to exist without narrative labels, inviting sensations to pass like clouds drifting across a wide sky. At first, it felt strange, like trying to watch a crowd without picking anyone out, but gradually, a relaxing spaciousness emerged. I realized that by softening the lens of attention, I reduced the intensity of the body's alarms. This exercise wasn't a magic bullet. It demanded perseverance and kindness to myself when old habits tried to reclaim control. But the tiny voids of ease that emerged were profound in their subtlety. Another revelation unfolded when I began understanding how my internal state was influenced by environmental rhythms and social exchanges. For example, encounters that required heightened vigilance, like a busy marketplace or emotionally charged conversations, left me with invisible residues that clung stubbornly to my muscles and thoughts for hours after. I started to track patterns, noticing how even the mere anticipation of these interactions created anticipatory tension. This heightened state of arousal, fueled by interactions or sensory overload, undermined my ability to disengage later, explaining why rest often felt elusive after demanding days. Engaging with bodywork practitioners introduced me to tactile techniques that fostered resensitization to safety signals. I remember a session where gentle touch along my spine evoked an unexpected wave of warmth and softening. It was as if my body, so long armored, began to remember what ease tasted like. These physical interventions complemented my mental efforts, offering a dual approach, one that united tangible sensation with mindful reflection. Together, they orchestrated a gradual loosening of tension's grip, illuminating pathways for sustained calm. One vivid image that remains with me is of a tightly coiled spring awaiting release. For so long, my body held itself tense, preparing for potential shocks, guarding against perceived hazards. Yet, when guided gently to unwind, the coil didn't snap or unravel chaotically. Instead, it stretched deliberately, acknowledging both its strength and capacity for flexibility. This metaphor became a steady reminder during difficult moments that resilience encompasses both holding fast and giving way with grace. Now, consider your own moments when stillness feels impossible. What subtle cues have you overlooked? Are there memories or sensations quietly anchoring you to tension? Recognizing these hidden influences opens the door to deeper healing, one that invites patience and curiosity toward the subtle choreography of your inner landscape. Your experience is a delicate dialogue between what is felt and what is known, and tending to this exchange with compassion allows the heavy armor to slowly morph into gentle embrace. In embracing this complexity, we find spaces where rest can flourish not as absence, but as a vibrant, living presence within us. For a long time, I was convinced that relentless tension was simply a matter of unfinished business lodged somewhere inside my mind. Yet, gradually, I began discovering that this strain wasn't only a mental puzzle. It had taken root in a layer of subtle, automatic processes operating beneath my awareness. These invisible forces acted like tireless sentinels, constantly scanning for threats, yet paradoxically misreading safe moments as signals to remain vigilant, keeping me locked in an endless loop of internal alarms. It felt as if my organism had developed a set of invisible wires, always humming with an electric charge too faint to see but impossible to ignore. I remember a particular afternoon when I tried a new approach. Instead of resisting my restless feelings, I invited them in, treating them less like enemies and more like unfamiliar guests. As I settled into a dimly lit room, I allowed myself to sense the subtle fluctuations of heat and tightness without interference. What struck me was how the tension carried a texture, sometimes sharp and brittle, sometimes dull and heavy, changing with the slightest shifts in my attention. This newfound recognition led to a profound reframing. Instead of viewing these sensations as obstacles, I started perceiving them as messages encoded in physical patterns, urging me to listen, to engage with an old internal rhythm seeking acknowledgement. A few days later, in conversation with a trusted friend, I described how I'd felt invaded by fleeting spasms, tiny shocks, rippling through me during moments of stillness. She suggested I consider that these spasms might mirror subtle echoes of unresolved conflicts or emotional turbulence trapped like unspoken languages in my corporeal self. This idea gnawed at me. What if my lived experience extended beyond conscious worries into primal imprints etched deep into the foundation of my being? I began researching how memories of trauma, even those I hadn't explicitly remembered, could embed themselves within automatic reflexes and muscle tone, subtly shaping my habitual state of alertness. The next shift came from experimenting with simple physical expressions. Instead of forcing cessation, I started embracing gentle movement, stretching limbs with slow, deliberate care untouched by performance anxiety, allowing soft sounds to escape naturally from my chest and throat. These acts seemed to break down internal barricades, releasing reservoirs of built-up tension that had refused to surface before. What surprised me was that the liberation was not immediate but gradual, like thawing frozen soil after a long winter, only revealed by patient and persistent nurturing. I realized healing required an intimate, iterative dialogue between what I felt and how I chose to respond, a fluid dance rather than a rigid fix. During a quiet walk one misty morning, I observed how external rhythms influenced my internal tempo. The pattern of my breathing synchronized with the cadence of my footsteps, and when I slowed my pace, my own sensations seemed to respond with a subtle softening. This natural feedback loop illustrated a powerful truth. The environment subtly scaffolds how we experience ourselves. When immersed in overwhelming or discordant stimuli, our physiology can spiral upward in tension. In contrast, harmony in surroundings invites a corresponding release. This insight motivated me to reshape my environments deliberately, dim lighting, textured fabrics, the scent of lavender, to create sanctuaries resonant with restoration rather than stimulation. At times, I found myself caught in a peculiar paradox. Striving for harmony sometimes led me to hyper-focus on sensations I wished to quell, inadvertently amplifying their resonance as if fuel was added to a flickering flame. This taught me the delicate balance between awareness and overattention. It was like noticing a creaking door repeatedly until the sound became intolerable. Learning to detach, or granting myself permission to let sensations ebb without judgment, became a cornerstone for finding reprieve in moments of tension. I practiced redirecting my mind, not to dismiss feelings but to frame them as passing tides in a vast ocean, inviting me to float rather than swim desperately against currents. On several occasions, I documented the subtle shifts emerging from these explorations. Notably, moments of quiet acceptance often unfolded into unexpected waves of relief, not through force, but through a willingness to be present with discomfort. I recall writing in my journal after a particularly restless night. Today, I sat with the stirring without resistances. I felt a fragile release, as if long-held breath escaped after decades of holding. These small triumphs accumulated silently beneath the surface, fostering resilience more durable than fleeting distractions or avoidance ever provided. A pivotal realization deepened when I connected these embodied experiences to a sense of agency, a reclaiming of ownership over internal states that once felt alien and uncontrollable. Gaining this foothold empowered me to negotiate differently with the sensations rising during rest. Where panic or irritation might have once gripped me, I now discovered an opportunity for gentle inquiry, a chance to unravel anxiety's grip thread by thread. This shift didn't eradicate unrest overnight, but it planted seeds for transformation that continue to grow with patient tending. Now, consider how this approach might inform your own encounters with persistent tension during downtime. What might happen if, rather than resisting sensations as enemies or symptoms, you welcome them as companions sharing vital information about your present state? How could you invite a conversation with these subtle promptings, learning their language without coercion or haste? In opening this space, you may find pathways to release once concealed beneath layers of unrecognized tension, allowing a deeper form of ease to arise, one crafted not through struggle, but through mindful presence and intentional compassion. There was a moment during a particularly restless night when I realized my attempts to quiet my thoughts always seemed to backfire, pulling me deeper into unease instead of peace. I lay still, hoping sleep would arrive, but my mind was a wild river, rushing with currents I couldn't control. My breath shortened, and I could feel a simmering heat rising through my chest, spreading to my neck and shoulders. It was as though an invisible wire inside me fizzed with tension, alive and alert despite my exhaustion. I sat up slowly, heart pounding, and whispered to myself, "Why can't I shut this off?" The answer, I discovered over time, wasn't found in trying to override my sensations, but in exploring unfamiliar territory, the connection between my habitual reactions and the unconscious fears lodged within. I began to notice subtle patterns, moments where calm triggered an almost reflexive surge of alarm. For instance, during a quiet afternoon, I'd sit with an aching stillness that felt like a trap rather than relief. That feeling was a fortress built by invisible bricks of past experiences, each one contributing to an automatic signal that equated slowing down with vulnerability. It dawned on me that my body had encoded a warning label on peace itself, marking rest as a possible doorway to harm rather than safety. My curiosity led me to experiment with redefining this relationship. Instead of resisting the prickling discomfort that accompanied attempts to relax, I granted it space, like inviting a hesitant guest into a warm room, observing without demanding an explanation. This shift wasn't easy. Uncertainty and doubt often flooded in. But slowly, I started to recognize the complex landscape beneath my sensations. Frequently, my thoughts would circle around unnoticed memories shrouded in emotion, echoes of moments when I felt powerless or overwhelmed, even if I couldn't name them clearly. These remembrances weren't just mental. They rippled through my muscles and tendons, shaping physical patterns that maintained tension like an unyielding script. In seeking relief, I explored how external influences intensified these internal signals. A bustling city sidewalk or a crowded elevator would unknowingly nudge my body into heightened alertness, like a sparrow startled by distant thunder. Social situations demanding quick judgment or emotional composure amplified that internal hum, leaving me drained hours later in solitude. I began to document these shifts, noting how sensory overload created lasting reverberations that no simple rest could erase. It became clear that my experience wasn't isolated within me. It unfolded as part of an ongoing dialogue between environment and embodiment. With this understanding, I worked to redesign my surroundings with intention. The dim glow of amber lamps, the soft texture of a worn armchair, and the subtle aroma of chamomile tea turned my apartment into a sanctuary modeled after gentle rhythms instead of sharp stimuli. Each element was a carefully placed brushstroke on a canvas meant to soothe, to invite patience, to foster renewed trust between myself and the environment. These conscious choices marked a turning point, illustrating how deeply external cues inform internal states, either escalating tension or cradling it toward release. Yet, new challenges emerged in how I managed my awareness of internal shifts. My habit of hyper-focusing on sensations often escalated discomfort, like watching a small spark until it seemed a roaring fire. It took conscious effort to step back and allow feelings to fluctuate naturally, much like observing waves from a distance without trying to control their rhythm. At first, that distance felt like detachment, even fear of losing control, but eventually it became a tool for navigating emotional terrain with grace and less resistance. I practiced grounding myself in breath, tracing the subtle expansion and contraction of my lungs as an anchor back to the present moment. Tangible connections with others played a crucial role, in this journey. Sharing my experience with people who listened without judgment created a bridge from isolation to belonging. Their gentle questions, reflections, and shared silences validated the complexities of the inner landscape I was exploring. In these conversations, I discovered that the loud alarm I carried had echoes in their own stories, silent battles waged beneath composed exteriors. This realization fostered compassion, both for others and myself, dissolving shame that often accompanies invisible struggles. Alongside mental exploration, I embraced physical practices that resonated with tenderness and unhurried presence. Slow, intentional stretches paired with mindful breathing carved out moments where tension melted quietly, without force. At times, a simple touch, hand resting lightly over my heart or along my side, became a powerful gesture of reassurance, connecting me directly to sensations of safety. These rituals, repeated consistently, transformed rest into an active process of healing, rather than a passive state to be achieved. Through all these experiences, I learned that true tranquility is not a fixed destination but a living, evolving process, a dance between surrender and engagement, stillness and movement. It requires cultivating a radical patience, allowing discomfort to exist alongside budding ease without rushing toward resolution. My internal dialogue shifted from harsh demands to gentle curiosity, inviting discovery instead of judgment. Now, consider how this applies when you find yourself caught in restless moments that resist calm. What new perspective might emerge if you greeted tension not as a problem, but as a messenger carrying memories and needs you've yet to hear? What environments could you create around you to invite safety and trust? What small rituals could you introduce to soften your experience, transforming rest from a battleground into a refuge? The path forward unfolds in these questions, guiding us away from conflict toward coexistence within our own complexity. As I sit here reflecting on this journey that has unfolded within me and between us, I can't help but feel as if we've been tracing the contours of a hidden terrain, one that is at once familiar and strange, dark yet inviting. There's a delicate weaving of unseen threads, a tapestry of experience and sensation stitched quietly beneath our everyday awareness. These threads tug at the edges of our consciousness, calling us to move beyond hurried judgments or simplistic solutions. Instead, they ask us to slow, to attune, and to meet ourselves with openness that's seldom easy but always transformative. It's akin to watching a complex painting emerge from a canvas at dawn. Colors mingle with the soft arrival of light, not defined, not rigidly bound, but fluid and alive. The shapes hint at stories, emotions that once felt fragmented now gathering strength in their union. The shadows retreat enough to reveal contours that invite exploration. This awakening doesn't arrive with fanfare or a clear declaration, but flows like a river that carves new pathways through resistant stone, patiently, persistently, reshaping the landscape from within. Walking this path together has taught me to attend to that interplay between resistance and surrender, action and stillness, sound and silence. It's as if we've danced delicately along a tightrope strung between holding on and letting go, a dance requiring trust in gravity's pull and a yearning to soar. In that balance lies a secret knowing. Growth surfaces not through overwhelming force, but through the willingness to embrace uncertainty, to welcome ambiguity as a teacher rather than an adversary. The spaces where discomfort lingers are not dead ends, but invitations, doorways that lead to previously unseen rooms in our inner architecture. I sense you might be feeling something familiar bubbling beneath your own skin, an apprehension, a restless energy that asks for acknowledgement rather than denial. This feeling is not a flaw to be fixed, but a vital messenger bearing petitions from depths that have long awaited kindness. What fascinates me is how these inner stirrings don't exist apart from us, but pulse in rhythm with our breath and beat in tandem with our heart. They remind us that our humanity is neither separate nor fractured, but a vibrant ecosystem where mind and body, past and present, fear and hope intertwine in a delicate symphony. Sometimes the challenge lies in learning to become fluent in this language, one that speaks in sensations instead of words, in impulses rather than logic. The process demands patience that stretches time itself, allowing us to witness cycles rather than chase resolutions. It invites the cultivation of an abiding curiosity and a tenderness strong enough to hold even our darkest moments. Because within that gentle interrogation, we encounter a deep knowing. Transformation isn't a single act, but a mosaic composed of myriad small acts of listening, acceptance, and courageous vulnerability. If I imagine this internal experience as a garden, it might look wild and overgrown at times, tangled nets of vines, thorns hiding blossoms. Yet beneath this complexity, there are pockets of fertile soil, waiting for delicate seeds of trust and compassion to be planted. The gardener's hands are careful but persistent, learning the art of nurturing what wants to grow rather than forcing what we think must grow. And in this garden, seasons come and go. Sometimes growth feels invisible, yet unseen roots deepen and strengthen, preparing for the moment when a bud unfurls and light blooms freely. There is also a profound dialogue occurring within these moments of quiet challenge, between the parts of us that long to rest and the parts wired to protect. This conversation is tender yet fierce, filled with a paradox of wanting to let go while gripping tightly. To listen in on this exchange is to realize how layered and complex healing truly is. It is not linear, nor is it neat. Instead, it is alive with twists and turns, pauses and progress, setbacks and breakthroughs. And this dynamic holds immense potential. It is the soil from which resilience arises, informs both surprising and deeply authentic. I reflect on how often we chase quick fixes and clear answers, eager to topple discomfort with what we imagine is willpower or discipline. But what if this pursuit blinds us to the wisdom hidden within the process itself? What if the cracks, the fissures, the raw edges we so desperately want to smooth are actually the portals through which light seeps in? There is a deep alchemy at work when patience replaces urgency, when acceptance dissolves resistance. This alchemy transforms struggle into learning, tension into possibility. As I journey through these realizations alongside you, I feel the pulse of an unfolding mystery, that the path we're on invites a radical reorientation to ourselves. It beckons us not to conquer or control, but to commune and collaborate. Together, we find the courage to approach that fixed inner signal, not as an enemy to be silenced, but as a companion bearing crucial messages. And in this shared encounter, a new rhythm rises, one that holds space for shadow and light, for chaos and calm, weaving an entirely new story grounded in presence. Walking this bridge between where we've been and where we're headed, I am filled with both humility and hope. These quiet awakenings carry the promise of something deeply alive within us, a possibility to inhabit our being with fresh eyes and open hearts. And so, as we stand at the cusp of what lies ahead, I invite you to feel this swell of readiness building beneath your ribs, like a tide poised to turn, a breath gathering to release. The true horizon approaches, and with it, the profound gifts waiting patiently to be claimed. I remember the way twilight seeped through my window that evening, casting long shadows over a world that felt too loud inside my own skin. I lay awake, weighing the heaviness that clung not just to my body, but to the restless churning within. It was not simply fatigue I wrestled with. It was the relentless echo of an alarm that no silence could dissolve. In that moment, a quiet realization settled in me, stirring a gentle but profound shift. The fight to tame this ceaseless internal noise wasn't a battle to be won by will alone, but an invitation to deepen my understanding of the intricate dance between tension and peace. There is a curious paradox in feeling captive to thoughts and feelings, as if chained by forces invisible, yet sensing that freedom is possible, an elusive brightness just beyond reach. I began to learn that this brightness did not lie beyond me, but residing in the delicate act of surrendering to what felt overwhelming. Surrender here was not defeat, it was courage veiled in softness. It meant allowing the wild currents within to flow without trying to dam them, meeting them with a hand extended instead of clenched into a fist. In those fragile spaces, I discovered that unrest holds a message, a voice shaped not only by past moments, but by the living pulse of my being. Instead of racing against every flicker of discomfort, I learned to pause, to listen as if it were a language whispering ancient truths. This attunement revealed that beneath the surface struggle lay an ache for safety, for belonging, for unshaken trust. It was a beckoning to remember how it felt to be held tenderly by existence itself, without judgment or urgency. I recall laying my hand on my chest, feeling the rise and fall of breath like a subtle tide. Each inhale gently breaking the stasis, each exhale a release, no matter how small. Through these acts of kindness toward myself, I glimpsed the possibility of rewriting old patterns, not by force, but through persistent gentle presence. It was as if my body and mind began composing a new melody, softer and steadier, replacing the frantic urgency with hopeful rhythms of ease. The process was neither linear nor simple. Often, waves of doubt stirred beneath progress, and nights of unrest returned with their familiar weight. Yet in those moments, the remembrance that growth often unfolds in spirals allowed me to greet setbacks without bitterness. They were invitations to renew patience, to deepen compassion for the tangled complexity within. I embraced the truth that healing is less about arriving at a fixed destination and more about moving through layers of self-awareness, unearthing hidden landscapes, and learning to inhabit them with grace. There was a particular night, rain tapping steadily against my window pane, when I felt a transformation subtly shift beneath my ribs. I was still restless, yet something inside me accepted the unrest as part of the present moment rather than a threat to be silenced. In that acceptance, a fragile peace blossomed, small, imperfect, yet real. It was as though I had opened a door to myself that had been sealed for years, allowing fresh air of possibility and renewal to circulate freely. That night taught me the quiet power of embracing all parts of ourselves without needing to fix or flee them. Sharing this journey with others deepened my experience beyond solitude. Their stories echoed mine, revealing that beneath varied faces of anxiety or restlessness exists a shared human yearning for security and connection. This communal thread knit the tapestry of struggle and hope into something alive and tender. Together, we wove stories of resilience, each thread distinct, yet entwined, testament to our courage in facing shadows and heralding light. Now, when I find my mind racing in moments meant for calm, I invite a different response, a soft curiosity that turns inward without critique, a breath that stretches wider than fear. The restless energy transforms from runaway chaos into a messenger guiding my steps toward a rhythm that feels authentic and true. I recognize that this unfolding dance does not require flawless mastery, only presence, patience, and a loving commitment to follow where the heart dares to lead. I offer this to you not as a prescription, but as a companion's hand along your path. May you find the grace to greet your inner turmoil not as an adversary, but as a teacher cloaked in challenge, offering you a doorway to deeper peace. Remember that the journey is yours alone to travel, but also a shared human passage through darkness into light. In every small act of gentle awareness, you reclaim your power and plant the seeds of restoration. And in that sacred reclamation, rest ceases to be a distant hope and becomes a living presence, echoing softly within, a steady flame guiding you home.